He should have died 100 times over. That is the first truth no one tells you about this story. A single mortal man, cursed by name inside the halls of Olympus, hunted across the wine-dark sea not by accident, not by bad luck, but by design. The gods did not merely allow monsters to cross his path. They sent them, deliberately, repeatedly, as if the entire ocean itself had been turned into a weapon aimed at one exhausted king trying to go home. And that raises a question most people never stop to ask. Why would divine beings, who could crush a man with a single thought, need monsters at all? Why not just kill him outright? Unless the monsters were never really about killing him. Unless they were about something else entirely. Somewhere between the fall of Troy and the shores of Ithaca, the story of Odysseus stopped being a simple tale of a soldier trying to return to his wife. It became something colder, something almost theological. A decade-long trial staged by immortals who wanted to see exactly what kind of man he was, underneath the armor, underneath the cleverness, underneath the crown. Every creature he faced, every nightmare pulled from the depths of the earth and sea, was a test disguised as a punishment. And the terrifying part is this: most of those tests he failed first before he ever learned how to pass them. So stay with this, because what you're about to hear is not the sanitized children's version of the myth. It is the real one. The one where a hero's pride nearly damns his entire crew, where the line between victim and villain blurs so thoroughly that ancient audiences themselves argued about it, where the question was, Odysseus evil? Is not a modern provocation, but an ancient anxiety, whispered in the same breath as praise for his cunning. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why the gods chose monsters instead of thunderbolts. You will understand what each creature actually represented, and you will understand why, of all the heroes in Greek myth explained across 1,000 campfires, none were tested quite like him. It begins, as it always must, with the smoke of a burning city still rising behind him. Troy has fallen. The wooden horse, his idea, his design, his triumph, has ended a 10-year siege in a single night of fire and slaughter. Odysseus stands on the black sand of the beach, watching the flames devour the towers of Priam. And for one moment, he believes the worst is behind him. He believes the war was the hard part. He believes the gods, having granted the Greeks their victory, will now grant him an easy passage home. He is wrong, catastrophically wrong, because somewhere in the smoke and the celebration, he has already begun making the mistakes that will summon monsters for the next 10 years of his life. His men, drunk on victory, sack a nearby town belonging to the Ciconians, showing no restraint, no mercy, no wisdom, and their king does nothing to stop them until it is too late, until the Ciconians rally reinforcements and strike back, killing dozens of his men on the beach before the ships can even escape. This is the first crack, the first sign that the cleverness which won the war might not be enough to survive the peace. Zeus watches this. Poseidon watches this, and far beneath the surface of the sea, in a cave that smells of salt and old blood, something else is watching too. The fleet limps away from the Ciconian coast, and for 9 days a violent storm seizes the ships and drags them far off course, away from the familiar waters that should have led them home within weeks. When the wind finally dies, exhausted and disoriented, they drift onto a strange shore, quiet, golden, fringed with flowering plants none of them recognize. There is no monster waiting on the sand, no roar, no threat, no visible danger at all. And that, it turns out, is exactly what makes this island so dangerous. This is the land of the lotus eaters. Odysseus sends 3 men ashore to scout the territory, a routine decision, the kind of small, forgettable choice that should not have mattered. The native people here are not hostile. They do not attack. They do not even seem to notice the newcomers as threats at all. Instead, they offer food, a strange, honeyed fruit grown from the lotus plant, sweet and unassuming, handed over with open hospitality. The 3 scouts eat it, and in an instant, something inside them simply stops. Not their bodies, their will. The moment the lotus touches their tongues, every memory of Ithaca, every thought of wives and sons waiting across the sea, every shred of urgency that has driven this entire voyage dissolves into a warm, drifting numbness. They do not want to leave. They do not even remember why leaving matters. They sit down among the flowering plants, faces slack with a peaceful, empty joy. And when Odysseus comes looking for them, they beg not to be rescued, but to be left there forever, eating lotus on a beach where nothing is ever asked of them again. This is a different kind of monster entirely, and it deserves to be understood as one, even though it never bears a single tooth or claw. Every creature Odysseus will face after this threatens him with violence. The lotus eaters threaten him with the opposite, contentment, a total, blissful erasure of purpose. It is the first hint of a danger that will return later, in a far more seductive form, the idea that the greatest threat to Odysseus was never going to be something that killed him quickly, but something that made him forget he ever wanted to go home at all. Odysseus understands the danger faster than his men do, and it costs him. He has to physically drag his 3 drugged sailors back to the ships, forcing them below deck while they weep and struggle against him, reaching back toward the shore they no longer want to leave. He chains them to the rowing benches himself, and when the rest of the crew asks what happened, he gives an order that will echo through the following weeks of the voyage. No one touches the lotus, no one steps foot past the tide line, and the moment the men are aboard, the ships pull away from that gentle, beautiful, quietly lethal shore as fast as the oars can carry them. No lives are lost here, no blood is spilled, and that is precisely what makes the Lotus Eaters such an unsettling entry in the myth when people sit down to actually study every monster he fought. It is the only encounter in the entire journey where the danger is not death, but the erosion of desire itself, a warning, placed early and easy to miss, that the greatest threat to Odysseus was never going to be the sea, or the giants, or the sorceresses. It was always going to be the temptation to simply stop. But stopping is not an option yet. The wind carries them onward, toward an island of wild grapevines and roaming goats, and Odysseus, driven by the same curiosity and hunger for glory that made him famous, chooses to explore a massive cave instead of sailing past it. This decision alone should stop you, because nothing forces him inside. No storm drives his ship there. No divine command compels him to enter. He walks in on his own, taking his best men with him, drawn by simple human greed for whatever treasure or supplies the cave might hold. What he finds instead is a Cyclops the size of a hillside, one enormous eye burning in the center of his skull, a shepherd of monstrous flocks who has never once been afraid of anything in his life. His name is Polyphemus, and he is the son of Poseidon, god of the sea, the very god whose favor Odysseus will need most for the journey ahead. And this is where the story reveals its first great irony. The men who followed Odysseus, the ones who trusted him, who believed in his judgment, beg him to leave before the giant returns. They see the danger immediately. Odysseus does not listen. He wants to see what manner of creature lives here. He wants the story. He wants, if we are honest, the glory of an encounter few men would survive to tell. Polyphemus returns, and in the space of a single night, he crushes 2 of Odysseus's men against the cave wall and eats them raw, their screams echoing off stone older than memory itself. This is not myth as adventure anymore. This is myth as horror. The survivors are trapped behind a boulder no 10 men could move, sealed inside with a creature that views them as nothing more than meat with names. It is here that Odysseus does something clever, devastatingly clever, that will haunt him for the rest of his voyage. He gets the Cyclops drunk on wine, so strong it should never have been drunk undiluted, then drives a sharpened stake into the giant's single eye while he sleeps, blinding him in an eruption of screaming agony that shakes the cave itself. The surviving men escape the next morning, hidden beneath the bellies of the giant's own sheep, slipping past his groping, blinded hands. They should have simply run. But pride does not let a man like Odysseus disappear quietly. As his ship pulls away from the island, he cannot resist shouting back across the water, revealing his true name to the creature he has just maimed, not a false name, not a clever trick. His actual identity screamed across the waves like a trophy. And that single act of vanity changes everything. Because Polyphemus, blind and humiliated, lifts his voice to his father, Poseidon, god of the sea itself, and curses the man who did this to him, curses him by name, not a curse of quick death, a curse of suffering, a curse that guarantees Odysseus will lose every single one of his men, and that even if he somehow survives, he will return home broken, alone, and unrecognized even by his own family. This is the moment the gods begin sending monsters, not before, here. Because of pride, because of one unnecessary shout across open water. Few people realize this part of the story, that the god actively hunting Odysseus for the rest of the Odyssey does so not out of cosmic cruelty, but because of a very human failure to simply stay quiet and disappear. Was Odysseus evil? No. But he was reckless in a way that turned a survivable encounter into a decade-long divine vendetta. And Poseidon, ruler of every wave between Troy and Ithaca, now has both motive and method to make this man suffer. The sea itself becomes hostile after this. Every storm feels personal. Every current seems to fight against the ship's course. But Poseidon is patient. He does not simply drown Odysseus outright. That would be too quick, too merciful. Instead, he lets other forces do the work. He lets the world itself become a gauntlet of monsters, each one another test of who this man truly is beneath the fame. The next horror arrives on a foggy morning when the fleet sails into what looks like a peaceful, sheltered harbor, cliffs rising on either side, calm water, and inviting stillness that should have raised suspicion in men who had already learned, at terrible cost, not to trust quiet places. They are Laestrygonians, giants, not unlike the Cyclops, but faster, more coordinated, more terrifyingly intelligent. The moment the ships are trapped inside the narrow harbor, boulders the size of houses rain down from the cliffs above, crushing hulls, splintering wood, turning the water red. Odysseus' own ship survives only because he had the foresight, the same caution that comes too late so often in this story, to keep it anchored outside the main harbor. 11 ships are destroyed in minutes. Hundreds of men die, speared like fish as they try to swim to safety, their screams lost beneath the giants' laughter. Only Odysseus' single vessel escapes. Think about that number. 11 ships, hundreds of lives, gone in the time it takes to read this sentence aloud. And Odysseus, the man history remembers as clever, cannot save them. His intelligence, his famous cunning, means nothing against the raw, brutal geography of a trap he sailed into with his eyes closed. This is where the myth begins asking a much darker question, one that scholars have debated for centuries. Is Odysseus truly the hero of this story, or is he simply the one who survives it? Every monster he fought did not just test his courage, it exposed the cost of his choices, paid in the lives of men who trusted him to bring them home, and the monsters are only getting started. The survivors, traumatized and diminished, land next on the island of the sorceress Circe, a being who is not quite mortal and not quite divine, who wields a power different from anything Odysseus has faced yet, not brute strength, not blind fury, transformation itself. She welcomes his men with a feast, wine poured generously, meat roasted to perfection, every comfort a starving, grieving crew could want after the horror of the Laestrygonians. And then, the moment they eat, she strikes them with her wand, and one by one, the men of Odysseus' crew become swine. Literal pigs, screaming with human minds trapped inside animal bodies, unable to speak, unable to warn the others, forced to watch their own transformation in horrified silence. This is not a monster of teeth and claws. This is something far more unsettling. A monster of the mind, one that strips away identity itself, that takes the very thing which makes a man human and buries it beneath fur and hooves and grunting despair. Odysseus only survives this trap because the god Hermes intervenes directly, offering him a magical herb that protects him from Circe's power, a rare moment where the gods actually help him rather than hunt him, and it raises an important nuance in this story that too many retellings flatten into simple heroism versus villainy. The gods are not uniformly against him. Some test him, some torment him, and occasionally one steps in simply to see what he will do when given a fighting chance. Odysseus confronts Circe with sword drawn, and rather than killing her, he forces her to reverse the spell, restoring his men. But then something curious happens, something that reveals just how morally tangled this entire journey has become. Instead of leaving immediately, instead of rushing his transformed men back onto the ship and fleeing this island of monsters, Odysseus stays for an entire year in Circe's company while his men wait, and his wife Penelope waits, and his son grows up without him on the shores of Ithaca. This is the part almost nobody talks about when they praise the Odysseus as the ultimate symbol of loyalty and homecoming. For 12 months, he simply does not go home. Not because a monster physically prevents him, not because divine wrath traps him there, because he chooses to stay. Was Odysseus evil? Perhaps not evil in the way we imagine villains to be evil, but flawed in ways the ancient audience understood far better than we often give them credit for. He is brilliant and reckless, beloved and unfaithful. A devoted king who nonetheless leaves his kingdom bleeding for a decade, absent even when the choice to return was entirely his own. It is only when his own men, finally regaining their courage, urge him to remember his home that he agrees to leave. But leaving Circe's island does not mean escaping her influence. Before he departs, she gives him one final warning. A warning about what waits beyond the horizon, a warning that will define the most iconic sequence in the entire myth. The Sirens, creatures whose voices are so beautiful, so impossibly perfect, that any sailor who hears their song abandons all reason and steers straight toward the rocks, wrecking his ship, drowning in ecstasy and shipwreck alike. Their island is surrounded by the bones and rotting flesh of 1,000 sailors who came before, men who heard the song and could not resist it, who died smiling. Circe tells Odysseus there is only one way to survive them: seal the ears of every man aboard with beeswax so thick that no sound can penetrate. But Odysseus, driven by that same unbearable curiosity that led him into the Cyclops' cave in the first place, cannot bear the thought of never knowing what the song sounds like. So he orders his men to tie him to the mast, hands and feet bound tight, and commands them, under no circumstances, no matter how much he begs or screams, to release him until the island is far behind them. What happens next is one of the most visually and emotionally cinematic scenes in the entire Odyssey. As the ship passes the rocky coastline, Odysseus hears it, the sirens' voices rising over the waves, promising him knowledge, promising him glory, promising him truths that no mortal has ever possessed. And the song is so overwhelming, so consuming, that he thrashes against his ropes, weeping, howling at his men to cut him free, to let him swim toward the voices even if it means his death. His men, ears sealed in wax, cannot hear his pleading. They simply row harder, exactly as instructed, watching their king writhe against the mast in something between agony and ecstasy, until the island fades behind them and the song finally, mercifully, disappears into the wind. It is a moment of triumph, yes. Odysseus becomes the only man in myth to hear the siren's song and survive. But it is also a moment that exposes something uncomfortable about him. Even bound, even warned, even fully aware of the danger, his hunger for experience nearly destroys him. His intelligence saved him this time only because he built himself a cage in advance, anticipating his own weakness. Few people realize that this is the truest theme of the entire myth. Odysseus is not simply hunted by monsters from the outside. He is, in many ways, hunted by his own nature, his pride, his curiosity, his inability to simply let well enough alone. And the next monster waiting for him will punish exactly this flaw in the most brutal way imaginable. Scylla and Charybdis, two horrors guarding a narrow strait, positioned so close together that avoiding one means sailing directly into the jaws of the other. Charybdis is a monstrous whirlpool, a living maelstrom that swallows the sea itself 3 times a day, capable of dragging an entire ship down into its churning throat. Scylla is worse in a different way. A 6-headed monster embedded in the cliffside opposite, each head equipped with 3 rows of teeth, each neck long enough to snatch sailors directly off the deck of a passing ship without ever slowing the vessel's course. Circe had warned him about this too, and her advice was chillingly practical. Do not try to fight Scylla because you cannot win, and any time spent fighting is time Charybdis uses to pull the entire ship into the abyss. Accept the loss of 6 men, 1 for each of Scylla's heads, and sail on because trying to save them all will cost you everyone. This is perhaps the darkest moral test in the entire journey, more disturbing in some ways than any physical monster, because it forces Odysseus to make a calculated, deliberate choice to sacrifice specific men under his command in order to save the rest. He does not warn them. He does not tell his crew what is coming, because he fears that if they know, they will panic, stop rowing, and doom the entire ship to Charybdis instead. So he lets them row in ignorance. And as the ship passes beneath the cliff, Scylla strikes, 6 heads darting down in an instant, seizing 6 men by the ankles, lifting them screaming into the air as their crewmates watch in horror, unable to help, unable to even understand what is happening until it's already finished. Odysseus later described it as the most agonizing sight of his entire journey, watching men who trusted him, who had survived Cyclops and giants and sorcery, torn apart above his head while he did nothing, said nothing, simply steered the ship forward exactly as planned. Was Odysseus evil? The question refuses to go away because here, the answer complicates itself further. This was not recklessness like the Cyclops' cave. This was calculation. A leader accepting necessary losses to preserve the whole. It is the kind of decision ancient audiences would have recognized from real warfare, real leadership, real command, the terrible mathematics of survival that separates kings from ordinary men. But knowing it was necessary does not make it painless, and it does not make Odysseus innocent of the guilt that follows him, silent and heavy for the rest of the voyage. The survivors, shaken and grieving, eventually land on the island of Thrinacia, sacred to the sun god Helios, home to his sacred cattle, beautiful, immortal, untouchable animals that Odysseus is explicitly warned by multiple sources never to harm under any circumstances. He knows this. His men know this. And yet, trapped on the island by relentless storms, starving after weeks with no food, his men break their oath while Odysseus sleeps, slaughtering and feasting on Helios' sacred cattle out of pure desperation. This is the final fatal transgression of the journey, and notably, it is the one moment where Odysseus himself is not directly responsible. He was asleep. He gave no order. And yet the consequences fall on everyone equally, because that is how divine justice works in this world. The gods do not distinguish between the man who gave the command and the men desperate enough to disobey it. Helios, enraged, threatens to drag the sun itself down into the underworld unless Zeus punishes those responsible. Zeus agrees, and the moment Odysseus' ship finally leaves the island, a lightning bolt splits it in half, drowning every single man aboard except Odysseus himself, who clings to broken wreckage and drifts alone for days across open water. Alone. That word deserves to sit with you for a moment. Because everything up to this point, the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops, the Giants, Circe, the Sirens, Scylla, has been building toward this single devastating truth. Odysseus does not simply lose his men to monsters. He loses them, piece by piece, choice by choice, until there is nothing left of the fleet that once sailed triumphantly away from Troy. What began as an army of survivors ends as a single man, floating on driftwood, utterly isolated in the middle of an indifferent sea. This is perhaps the cruelest irony the gods designed into his punishment. Not death. Isolation. A man famous for his cleverness, his leadership, his ability to talk his way out of any danger, left with no one left to lead, no one left to save, no one left to impress. Just silence and salt water, and the slow realization of everything his choices have cost. It is here, drifting toward the island of the Nymph Calypso, that the true nature of his punishment reveals itself. Calypso does not attack him. She loves him. She offers him immortality, a paradise beyond anything mortal life could offer, an eternity free of monsters and grief and loss. And for 7 years, Odysseus stays there, trapped not by chains but by comfort, weeping every day for a home he cannot reach, caught in a prison built from paradise itself. This, more than any cyclops or sea monster, might be the cruelest creature the gods ever sent against him, the temptation to simply stop trying, to accept comfort in place of purpose, to let Ithaca fade into memory rather than face the pain of continuing to fight for it. It is the same trap the Lotus Eaters set for his men at the very beginning of the voyage, only now it is set for the king himself, and it lasts not for an afternoon, but for 7 long years. And this is where the myth finally answers the question it has been circling since the beginning. Why did the gods send monsters instead of simply killing him? Because death would have ended the lesson too quickly. What Zeus, Poseidon, Athena, and the others were truly testing was not whether Odysseus could survive violence. Plenty of men could do that. They were testing whether he could survive himself, whether his cleverness could ever mature into wisdom, whether his pride could ever be tempered into humility, whether a man capable of such brilliance and such recklessness could ever earn the right to go home. Every monster he fought mirrors a flaw inside him. The Lotus Eaters punished his men's, and eventually his own, hunger for oblivion. Polyphemus punished his vanity. The Laestrygonians punished his carelessness. Circe punished his self-indulgence. The Sirens punished his insatiable hunger for glory. Scylla forced him to confront the cost of leadership, and Helios's cattle proved that even when he wasn't directly at fault, the consequences of the world he built around himself would still fall upon him. Athena, who favors him above all mortals, eventually convinces Zeus to release him from Calypso's island, not because he has suffered enough, but because he has finally, after everything, chosen to keep trying. He builds a raft with his own hands. He sails back into a sea that has tried to kill him a dozen times over, fully aware it might still succeed. And when Poseidon, still furious, sends one final storm to destroy him, Odysseus survives not through cunning this time, but through sheer stubborn endurance, swimming for 2 days and nights, clinging to life by will alone until he washes ashore, naked, broken, and utterly humbled on the island of the Phaeacians. This is the man who finally returns to Ithaca, not the arrogant king who shouted his name across the water to a blinded giant, a man stripped of his ships, his crew, his pride, and his certainty, rebuilt piece by every monster the gods placed in his path. So when people ask, was Odysseus evil, the honest answer the ancient world offers is more complicated than yes or no. He was proud, he was reckless, he made choices that cost good men their lives, but he was also punished relentlessly, precisely because the gods believed he was capable of becoming something better and refused to let him return home until he did. The monsters were never really the point, they were the method. A decade-long trial by fire and fang and flood, designed not to destroy Odysseus, but to strip away everything false in him until only the truth remained. And when he finally stands again on the shores of Ithaca, unrecognized even by his own wife, it is not a triumphant homecoming in the way we imagine heroes returning. It is quieter than that, heavier. The return of a man who has been rebuilt from nothing, who understands now, in a way he never did standing before the burning towers of Troy, exactly what it costs to become worthy of the home he fought so hard and lost so much to reach.